Thinking aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore psychic criminology, and with me is psychic detective Nancy Tertre, who is author of Psychic Intuition, Everything You Wanted to Ask But Were Afraid to Know. She is also the author of How to Talk to an Alien. In addition, she is a corporate attorney specializing in securities litigation. Welcome again, Nancy.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
A pleasure to be with you once more. You know, I have a master's degree in criminology from Berkeley, UC Berkeley. It took me 3 years to get it, but you spent, I think, almost a decade or maybe more than a decade studying with a professional psychic detective in order to acquire your skills in that area.
I started out not thinking that that's what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of evolved into that. It was close to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
With a well-known psychic detective, Nancy Orlen Weber.
Mm-hmm.
She has she's been given an honorary badge by the State Police of New Jersey for her work in psychic detective work. So I was sort of apprenticed to her for that amount of time.
That's a long time.
That is a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, I didn't go into it thinking that that's what I was going to be doing. I thought I was simply observing to see how she taught this, to see if it could be taught, and then to see what kind of things you do, what kinds of skills you need in order to become a psychic detective.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not for everybody. I think it takes, to be any kind of a detective, psychic or regular detective, you need to have a certain constitution where you're willing to confront, to put it bluntly, evil.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think, there are different specialties for different types of psychics. Most people don't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of them prefer to go into sort of the healing arts or the spiritual, the readings or prophecies or that kind of thing. There are not that many people that are cut out for this because you are dealing with evil. You're dealing with it on a very, very personal level because that's how you get your data.
You're getting inside, essentially, the consciousness of an evildoer.
Yeah, either that or you're showing up at usually kind of an unpleasant crime scene.
Yeah.
You're mentally showing up.
Right.
And you have to experience it with all of your senses.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, I do remember one particular case. We were shown photos of, it was I think a young girl, she couldn't have been more than about 8 years old or so, who had been really brutally murdered. Mm-hmm. And the photo showed her all, tied up and with leaves and stuff from having been buried. And I ended up connecting mentally with the perpetrator. Mm-hmm. And it was, I being inside that mind, that's what it felt like to me, was so disgusting. It's hard even to describe it. All I wanted to do was, take about 1 million baths after that, and that wasn't going to do it. Yeah. So there's certain techniques that you use also to sort of cleanse yourself of that experience because it lingers and it's nasty.
Well, and my understanding is that many psychics, even doing a conventional reading with a normal person, would want to do some sort of cleansing of themselves afterwards.
Well, that's interesting you're saying that because I go into this with a different attitude, but I've never done that.
You haven't.
I simply don't.
Yeah, but some do.
Many do. Most people believe that you have to cleanse. And I know people who are doing, they do Reiki or other types of healing things. And if they're switching clients, they're cleansing.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, I figured my attitude was good enough to keep me, above that.
Mm-hmm. Except when you come into these hardcore situations.
Yeah. And that's when it sort of dawned on me. Maybe I was naive, but it dawned on me that I needed to do something to keep myself separate.
Yeah.
Which is very hard. And by the way, one of the, you didn't mention that I also I co-wrote the memoirs of a retired New York City homicide detective.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was very, very interesting.
Who also had psychic gifts, as I recall.
No.
Oh,
no.
Okay.
No. Very intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, some of the most intuitive groups of people are police officers and nurses.
Mm-hmm.
No, he was intuitive. He had only worked with psychics once or twice,
Mm-hmm.
and they tend to fall into categories. Either they're willing to work with you, or it's no way, not touching that.
Well, I can imagine many police would feel embarrassed by being associated with a psychic for any number of reasons. But even in the best of circumstances, you're likely to be laughed at.
You're likely to be laughed at.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? You're going to be laughed at if you're doing this kind of work, if you're associated with this kind of work, or whatever. But the fact is, it doesn't really matter. If you're getting results, you're getting results.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only thing anybody should be looking at.
And I think it's probably important in your life story that you're also an attorney. You have a real career.
Yes, I have a real career. Yeah, a few of them actually.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to. I don't mind getting laughed at. In fact, sometimes if you're getting laughed at, it's the best thing for you because it's means people are curious but bothered.
Yeah. Well, it's understandable that people are going to have strange emotional reactions. They might get angry or they might make fun of you because they're confronting something they don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what's propelled me into a lot of these psychic realms is to be able to teach people about it and to get people more comfortable with the concepts. Mm-hmm. It's not strange, supernatural, voodoo type of stuff. It's absolutely real, and everybody has the capability.
And you're the demonstration of that because you weren't a person with noticeable psychic gifts before you began your training.
Yeah, I didn't have any as far as I knew. Mm-hmm. And as I said, when I started first this sort of apprenticing, I thought I was just an observer in this group.
Yeah.
And I would play along, if we were, there was one example. We were a small group of, I think we were all women, the group that stayed together for a long time. And our Nancy Weber would hand us a piece of folded paper.
Yes.
Your job was to hold it, feel the vibrations, whatever that meant. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, I thought you were supposed to feel something like this, which, of course, you don't. It's a whole different concept.
Much more subtle.
A little bit more subtle. And, you'd pass it around the group, and that was it. And then you would have to write down whatever your impressions were, having no idea. You didn't even know what the topic was. Mm-hmm. The only thing that you knew was that you were in a workshop setting involving psychic detective work, period, end of story. That's all you knew. Now, the probability is, you're probably working with a homicide, but not necessarily. There were missing people, missing animals. There were sexual assaults. There were, a bunch of different things. At any rate, I wrote down what I got, and I think I'd written down. I saw a particular landscape with a little bit of snow, a lot of young sapling trees, and sort of a sparse kind of forest. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I guess maybe this is where a crime scene happened. Mm-hmm. And I see a large eyeball. I don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I write that down.
Mm-hmm.
I see...
Your eyes are closed when you're doing this?
No, my eyes are open.
Uh-huh.
And it's what anybody normally would say using your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
You're just looking, allowing your brain to kind of follow wherever it's going to go. You follow your brain. You don't tell your brain where to go. That's the difference. Mm-hmm. And I saw a scarf, I thought maybe belonging to a young girl in this young forest with, young trees. And at some point I see body parts appearing underneath the light layer of snow.
Uh-huh.
And I begin to look at it in my mind. I get a little bit closer. I see there's some blood, and I think, ugh, I don't want to go there. Shut down, turn it off. That's the end of my little scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I got from holding a folded piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of this, our teacher said, okay, what did everybody get? And everybody shares, and everybody got something different.
Mm-hmm.
What I've learned is if you put 10 psychics in the same room, you're going to get usually 10 different scenarios.
Sure.
The question is, can they all be right? And the answer is yes. Because if you're looking at a globe
mm-hmm.
from 10 different angles,
mm-hmm.
you've got 10 different pieces of that globe. And usually that's what happens. At any rate, it turned out, yes, it was a homicide.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this particular body was dumped, apparently, by the perpetrator in an area that was exactly the way I described. Yes, the body parts were visible the way I described. No, there was no young girl involved. Although my teacher, who was always trying to be positive, because you have to do that in this field.
Yeah.
She said, well, I think maybe that was the daughter of this victim. The eyeball that I saw wasn't literal. It was symbolic. It
mm-hmm.
was figurative. And that's another thing when you're doing this work, you have to distinguish what's literal and what's not.
How do you do that?
I don't know. I think you do it through experience. You begin to learn.
At some point, you're just able to discern.
I think so. And I think the fact that my imaging of this scene was so literal and this vision of the eyeball was so large, it had to be symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
It was... Anyway, it turned out that I had interpreted it as a witness.
Mm.
Turns out there was an accomplice who had helped dump the victim's body.
Mm-hmm.
And when my teacher turned over the piece of paper, she said, I'm going to read you what's on this piece of paper that you all held.
Yeah.
Was written the word young. Now, I had used the word young repeatedly. Young trees, young forest, young girl, young.
Yeah.
I thought I was describing something.
Mm-hmm.
Young turned out to be the name, the police suspect.
Mm.
So your brain won't, your literal logical brain isn't necessarily going to take you down the pathway you think.
Mm-hmm. In other words, you're going to go somewhere that might seem completely illogical to you, and even later might seem illogical, but you've got to keep pursuing it.
You have to.
Mm-hmm.
That's the name of this game.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pursue it. And by the way, most people, the minute they see something illogical, they shut it down.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that doesn't make sense. It would have made sense if we're in the middle of summer. No, it has to be, a nice sunny day out with no snow.
Mm-hmm.
You're not sensing at that point. You're thinking.
It seems as if your teacher was very skilled in creating an atmosphere where you didn't shut it down, where you kept going for nearly a decade or perhaps over a decade.
Yeah. And I never understood, reading about all the, the psychics and the debunkers. I couldn't understand what's the problem having a skeptic in the room? Mm-hmm. What's the problem having negative people? Who cares? If you have a strong person, well, it actually interferes.
Yeah.
It really does. Because this material is so delicate. It's very, very fragile. And to even explore, to go into it, you have to have 100% freedom to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the same time, you have to be open to the nuances, the subtleties, the delicacies of it, and yet able to withstand the intense horror and emotion that might come up as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Another example I'll give you, we were dealing with I believe, a spirit of a pedophile. Mm. Now, I don't like to channel. Mm-hmm. I just don't like it. I don't want to give up the vessel. I'll communicate. Mm-hmm. I have no problem doing that. But
you do consider yourself a spiritual medium.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
But that's different for you than channeling.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Channeling is when you step aside mm-hmm. and you say, go ahead, use my body, use my voice, use whatever you need to. You can step in. I won't do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just me.
Yeah.
But I'll talk. At any rate, I started to feel I could feel this pedophile energy mm-hmm. of this person mm-hmm. I could feel myself beginning to channel. Uh-huh. And I could feel, I was in my head, I could feel curse words, I could feel a whole different emotional attitude towards people. It was disgusting.
This is a deceased person,
That was a deceased person, mm-hmm. but a criminal.
Yes.
There are things like that you don't want to touch, you don't want to go near. Most people don't realize you do have the capability of shutting it down.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fear. A lot of people don't want to go into this field. They're afraid once you get in, you lose all control.
You might go crazy, or people will think you've gone crazy.
Well, that part I don't mind. Uh-huh. They can think whatever they like.
Yeah. It's because you have a good, strong sense of yourself.
You have to. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be doing any of this work if you don't have a good, strong sense of yourself. And actually, I'm very happy with my background in psychology mm-hmm. because it's helped me understand what's insanity and what's an exploration. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference. Yep. And a lot of times, it's very subtle.
Sure, many great creative artists go into states of creative frenzy that might seem very similar to insanity, but the product may be a wonderful masterpiece.
Absolutely, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what it's like to work with police, because being a psychic detective, whether you're working with police or family members, you become part of a social group that is endeavoring to solve a problem. And I'm certainly under the impression that everybody who you work with can contribute to the success or failure of the endeavor.
Yes, and I'm glad you put it that way, because I think there are an awful lot of so-called psychic detectives out there mm-hmm. who they're thrilled by their own success. Mm-hmm. And once they get a direct hit, they're successful in whatever it is mm-hmm. they've come up with, they want to take 100% credit. And that bothers me mm-hmm. because the way I view a psychic detective is we are simply an investigative tool, mm-hmm. like any other tool that the police have in their tool chest. Mm-hmm. And you're there to contribute. You're there to find evidence if you can, or give them information or clues that are going to help them on their investigation. But you don't, as a psychic detective, you don't solve a case. Mm-hmm. The police solve the case.
Yeah. One of the things that you've written about that I found interesting is that you like to get feedback when you come up with information. You like to have the people you're working with give you some feedback about it so that you can continue to work on it and dig a little deeper into the direction if it seems like a promising direction.
That's what helps me. That's the way I work. Mm-hmm. I used to be concerned that if you allowed information to come into your psychic realm, that somehow you'd polluted the value of your psychic information.
Yeah. I mean, I know remote viewers try to be very careful.
Absolutely.
Not to know anything at all about the target.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm familiar with it, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. And you can get excellent information that way. When I'm doing just regular readings, I don't want information about people. What I do want, because I do something, I don't know of other psychics who do this, I do an advanced reading, which is a little bit similar to remote viewing.
Yes.
But what I need are questions, because questions allow me to focus. Getting feedback for me is key, because that propels me on to the next thing. It's giving me a little bit of a flashlight to see the pathway in front of me. And I find that useful.
Well, and you find, because I know it's important for you to put your logical mind out of the picture, so you're able to do that.
Yes, as long as I don't get too much information. If I get too much information, I'm going to start thinking, because that's my natural tendency.
So it's about that perfect balance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Another thing that you've pointed out with regard to the whole profession of psychic criminology is that there are now thousands and thousands of unsolved murders that are, I guess, known as cold cases in the business. The police just have no leads at all. These are cases that might well be amenable to psychic criminological investigation.
It's sort of like a double-edged sword, because there's so many of them. In fact, a detective who I have worked with, he deals with cases of missing children, and they're in the hundreds of thousands a year now. It's just unbelievable, unbelievable. The problem is you have limited resources with the police and law enforcement, and if you get too many psychics in the mix, giving you clues that are a little bit all over the place, you don't have the resources to go tracking down each one of them.
Right.
So it's almost, I think in some ways prefer not to know, unless you give them something that is so absolutely, dead on accurate that they know it's true to start with, and then they'll run with it.
Well, you mentioned there are maybe thousands of people out there calling themselves psychic detectives, and we don't have good statistics on how successful they are. I know I have personally been involved in cases that have been successful, and I worked with a woman now deceased, Kathleen Ray, in California, who had maybe 30 or 40 badges from different police departments that she had worked with. She had a very good track record, and I've interviewed law enforcement officials who worked with her successfully. But not everyone has a track record like that. And for police, it must be kind of mystifying. They're not necessarily equipped to integrate the whole field of parapsychology and psychic work.
Not at all. And on top of that, it's dangerous. And this is what I tell a lot of people who say, I want to be a psychic detective. I think such and such, happened in a case. I think I'm going to call up the police now and tell them. And I say, well, you know what? Hold on. Because if you're really good and you don't have a relationship, you could be arrested.
Yes.
And that's, I have a good friend of mine who visualized an absolutely horrific case where a young child was raped and murdered and put under the floorboards of a location. And she saw this for day after day after day. And she sent a friend of hers out to the location that she had seen in her mind. And her friend was, I think, hauled off by the FBI. You have to be really careful about what you offer.
I've heard of other instances just like that.
Yeah. So it's a little bit a question of, how do you get the track record? It's a little bit, chicken and the egg.
Well, you did, you took the right step by apprenticing yourself to someone who already had the track record.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was a little bit, the business card to make the entrance into that field.
But I understand that you yourself and many of the psychic detectives that I know about will work with police without charging anything?
I've never charged anything.
Mm-hmm.
And in those cases, and as I said, they're usually homicides.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I look at it, it's a public service.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't feel right charging for it.
It's something you're called to do, I guess.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's an unusual profession. It's not when you're in high school studying all the different professions. What are you going to do when you grow up? I don't think becoming a psychic detective.
That wasn't on my list.
It doesn't get on the list. But it's something that I know people, very special people, get somehow drawn into or called into this work. And I can say, as a criminologist, and even as someone who has testified in court on behalf of a psychic detective, because of my background in parapsychology and criminology, there is a reality there. And this is one area in which there's a real human need. And when the need is strong, it strikes me that psychic functioning works at its best.
Absolutely does. And if you're dealing with emotions that are that intense, and it could be the intensity of the emotions as a person is killed, or the intensity of somebody killing, or the intensity of the family members who are grieving. It's like a psychic magnet,
a telepathic beacon.
Absolutely, it takes you there much faster than if, for example, you're dealing with financial issues, or am I going to make a lot of money next week, or whatever.
Well, Nancy du Tertre, thank you so much for sharing this half hour with me and your work in this very important area.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you for being with us.